So President Trump is increasingly facing criticism from former military leaders over the way he's been handling these nationwide protests. Ben Tracy standing by at the White House so we can dig a little deeper into this. These former leaders, Ben, are not mincing words. In fact, for many people, their frankness and direct criticism is coming as a surprise. It's not part of tradition. Can you kind of give me a sense of, what we're hearing from these former military leaders and how the White House is reacting?
Yeah, it's pretty stunning to see. These military leaders, many of them are former Joint Chiefs of Staff. They're not people who want to come out and necessarily criticize a sitting commander-in-chief, but they are responding to some of President Trump's rhetoric in recent days where he has talked about using the military, using police, using the National Guard to dominate the streets. Those are the words that he uses. So you now see some of these folks coming out, like Admiral Mike Mullen, one of the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying that the American people are not the enemy. You do not use the military to go after protesters in our own country. We use the military to fight foreign wars. And the fact that they think the president needs to be reminded of that is also kind of stunning in its own right.
So, Ben, in an article released over the weekend, the New York Times reported a number of prominent Republicans, including former President George W. Bush, won't support President Trump's bid for re-election. We've seen a number of Republican lawmakers, a couple, offering some rare public rebukes of the president's response to the protests. It's been fascinating to see former military leaders, including the former Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis. We've seen the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, both in Colin Powell, who's also Secretary of State and also former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Admiral Mike Mullen. We've seen General John Allen. I know that supporters of the president will say, well, they represent the swamp. But how significant is it that you've got these people who are respected within the Republican Party and respected across the country, publicly rebuking the president of the United States? And the question from the White House, Ben, is, are they worried about it?
Well, yeah, I think that last part when you talk about these are people that are respected across the country, there is some significance to that when you talk about people like Colin Powell, people like General Mattis. And the list of people criticizing the president is getting much longer. This seems to be right now mostly in direct response to how he has handled the racial unrest across the country, but also how many of them feel that he has handled responding to the coronavirus pandemic, and then a long list of other things that they take issue with this president. But as you have said, some of these are kind of the usual suspects, people like Senator Mitt Romney, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who have often been critical of the president. Murkowski came out last week saying she's finding it increasingly hard to support the president. In the context there, she was talking about supporting his re-election. And that's where this becomes kind of significant, because President Trump is the sitting president of the Republican Party. So to have some Republicans come out, whether they're former presidents or whether they're sitting U.S. senators, and say, I'm not sure I'm going to support the president of my own party, that's different than the last time around in 2016 when it was just candidate Donald Trump. But we'll see how this plays out. You have people like George W. Bush saying he's not going to be able to support the president's re-election. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to vote for Joe Biden. I believe the last time around, he and the former First Lady Laura Bush voted for none of the above.
So, of course, a lot of this criticism is coming, this criticism where people are breaking with protocol, after that speech in the Rose Garden, as you pointed out, but also the photo op that came with it. And there's been a lot of dancing around, well, who ordered the protesters moved and to what degree of force was necessary and all that sort of stuff. So Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation spoke to the Attorney General about the decision to move the protesters. Let's play a little bit of that sound.
When I came in Monday, it was clear to me that we did have to increase the perimeter on that side of Lafayette Park and push it out 1 block. That decision was made by me in the morning. It was communicated to all the police agencies, including the Metropolitan Police, at 2 p.m. that day. The effort was to move the perimeter 1 block. And it had to be done when we had enough people in place to achieve that.
All right, so figuring out exactly who is responsible for the order has been kind of this moving target. The defense secretary said he didn't know about it, then he did know about it, but not all of it. So now we're hearing from William Barr, and I really have to give it to Margaret Brennan because she really sort of kept the pressure up in this interview. What does what the Attorney General say about that incident fit in with the narrative that we know?
Well, and I think what was great about Margaret's interview with him is that it points out that his recounting of what happened doesn't really add up. He's saying basically that he gave that order in the morning, which does not explain why this did not happen until after almost 6:30 at night, which just so happened to be right when the president was talking in the Rose Garden and then planned to walk through that park where all those protesters were. So it's an odd coincidence if that just happened to be a coincidence that it all happened that way. There's also this issue over the use of force by the park police and others to clear those peaceful protesters out of the park. It was violent the night before, but when this happened on Monday, this was a peaceful protest that was going on. The Attorney General keeps saying there was no tear gas used. The White House says there was no tear gas used. But when you talk to the CDC or the park police, they say these pepper balls, which is essentially pepper spray that gets diffused into the crowd, they say that these balls contain chemical irritants designed to cause tears. So it's a bit semantics to say that it's not tear gas in the conventional sense. It essentially does the same thing. We've also been told by the White House and by the Attorney General that 3 warnings were given to people in the park to clear out before that force was used. Some of our CBS colleagues were in the park and they say that they did not hear any warning, let alone 3 of them.
Yeah, Ben, it was remarkable also to hear the Attorney General in that exchange with Margaret essentially blaming the media, saying that the media was inaccurate about the demonstrators who were out there. The president also, as you know, Ben, in a tweet yesterday says that he's ordered the National Guard to start withdrawing from Washington, but that they can, quote, quickly return if they are needed. The president has tweeted several times, law and order in all caps. But there's a new poll out from CNN that shows that the president is really losing steam against former Vice President Joe Biden. What is the significance of that messaging? Does the White House feel the messaging that the president has right now, which is law and order, which is reopening the debate into kneeling during the national anthem at NFL games when Roger Goodell says that the NFL was wrong in its approach to the controversy when Colin Kaepernick started to take that knee? The president's still hammering down on things that perhaps don't seem to be the mood of the country right now. What are you hearing?
Yeah, there seems to be a play to his base and perhaps his re-election strategy to engage them. However, as you've said, it does feel a little dissonant with what's going on, what we're seeing on TV, to be tweeting out even again this morning, just in the last couple of hours, law and order, when what we have seen for the last couple of days are peaceful protests all across the country. That doesn't seem to be tracking with what we're seeing, and it's not clear if the president thinks that peaceful protests are somehow unlawful or disordered. We will ask the White House that question at the briefing later today. But this does seem to be part of his messaging. This harkens back to a phrase that Richard Nixon used to great effect back in the 1960s when he said he would be the president of law and order, cracking down on crime and kind of responding to the mood of the day when there were a lot of political assassinations going on.
Before we let you go, let me ask you about House Democrats. They're scheduled to announce sweeping police reform package a little bit later on today. What do we know about what we should be hearing from Nancy Pelosi?
Yeah, so they are going to put out this package of police reforms, which include things like calling for anti-bias training for police departments. What's not clear is if the White House supports any of this or would go along with any of this, which would call into question whether or not the Republican-led Senate would go along with any of it. The president has been asked what his plan is to combat police brutality, to combat racism in the country, and so far all he has said is that his plan is a strong economy. He is going to meet with members of law enforcement here at the White House today, but it is still not clear who will be in that meeting and what exactly the president is trying to learn.
All right, Ben Tracy for us at the White House. Ben, as always, we thank you, my friend.
Thank you.